I just want to remind everybody that though this is always offered as a free service for the community, it always helps us if you give donations. And I also want to thank you as a community, because your donations have really made a difference for us. The donations have kept us strong and healthy during a period when it's been a very difficult time for many not-for-profits. So bless you all, and thank you for being with us. And I'm going to turn this over now to Emileena Pedigo, and we're going to start the discussion.
So before we get started, I want to invite everybody just to take one collective breath together to really ground ourselves in this space that we've created. We have a lot of really great people in this room. We're up to 77 people right now. We have writers, we have performers, publicists, mentalists, hypnotists, producers, a lot of really innovative, creative people in this room. So thank you for joining us and being part of this conversation. So let's just take a moment to acknowledge maybe any stress that we're experiencing in our lives and be grateful to that for being part of our experience, but really letting it go right now so we can just be here now. Thank you. Thank you so much. So this panel, our producers, artists, just want to give a little quick background on it. So this idea really started for me around the time of the minimum wage disputes between actors and producers a few years ago, and also my own labor dispute, which we may be having a panel on at some point. But this conversation was my attempt to bridge the divide between talent and producers. And then I've also been studying what I call the artist mentality for the last 5 years or so as part of my book, Another Way, The Tao of Artist Development. And in my research, I kind of discovered that I myself started to identify as an artist, even though I'd spent so long really making the distinction with people that I was a producer and I was not a performer, I was not on that side, I was a producer. And it really started to make me think, and now I even wonder if my career as a producer would have been a little easier if I had approached it as an art. So that's kind of the background on this. And today what I see is the role of producer is rapidly evolving, especially in the expanding DIY culture that we find ourselves in. There's more self-producers than ever, especially with the pandemic. And so the lines between us and them has really started to blur. And so what exactly is the role of what is the role that producers are playing today? And that is the question we are exploring today. And it means something different to everyone. And so I certainly don't have any answers. I think as a community, that's why community is so important. I'm excited to begin this conversation about it. A producer goes by many names. Creative producer, fundraising producer, self-producing artist, line producer, consulting producer, producing artist, which I still am not sure what that means, but I like it. I called myself managing producer of the Midtown International Theater Festival when I was there, which I just kind of came up with. So I'd like to introduce this stellar panel we have for you today. I'm really excited that everybody was able to come together for this. And what we have on this panel is 2 creative producers by trade and 2 artists kind of turned producers. So I'm going to give a brief intro to each one and and give each of you a chance to kind of give a background on yourself and tell us what kind of producer you are, what's your producing style, and kind of how you got there. So I'm going to start with the producers. Tom Polum. Tom, are you here? I actually didn't even see you.
I am here.
Ah, fantastic. Hello, Tom. So Tom was the lead producer on Toxic Avenger, and which I was so excited, huge fan. And so I'm really excited you could join us. And the music and lyrics were by David Bryan, who was of Bon Jovi. And at that time, that was certainly the first I had seen that. And in my mind, it was this really creative way of merging these 2 industries. And of course, David went on to do Memphis and And we had had moments, you know, like Hair, where there's pop music coming in, but this was the first of this kind of star coming in. And Toxic Avenger was this really innovative production, I thought, with the band on stage. And again, we've seen some of these since then, but I really saw Toxic Avenger as one of the first to pave the way for that. So I know I was struck by the art of that production. And I know you're also doing streamingmusicals.com right now, which I think is your latest project. So again, give us a brief background and about what you consider yourself as a producer.
Yeah, sure. Well, I started this, you know, wanting to be an actor, like many people want to go in business, because I grew up in the northern part of Wisconsin, and that's my only access to how do you work in the theater. I didn't know what a producer was. I didn't know what a line producer was. I didn't know what a casting director was. None of that made any sense to me. So got my formal education in musical theater, then went to Chicago and then to New York, and then quickly realized that I really enjoyed the creative part of it, and worked as a director for a number of years, and then that led to producing. Because I really feel like with Toxic Avenger, it's a piece where my producing partner and I came up with the idea, found the writers, put it together, developed the show over a number of years, found the regional theater, brought it to off-Broadway, attempted to bring it to Broadway unsuccessfully. But in terms of being intimately involved in that production, that's something I was. I've also worked as just a financial producer as well, which is something I wasn't as interested in doing, because I really like the hands-on approach. And I know there's a lot of producers here who are intimately involved in their projects, and I think those are the ones that we get really passionate about, because we feel we're invested in many ways, but invested in the final outcome of the piece. And with streamingmusicals.com, we really took that next step in terms of finding a low-cost alternative to introducing new works to the world, which is what we've been working on for the last couple of years. And then obviously the current situation has turned everything virtual, so it's opened up some other doors for us. So in a nutshell, that's who I am and how I approach it.
Cool, thank you. Next we have Patricia Klausner, who was a producer on a number of commercial productions, including the Pippin revival, Scottsboro Boys, and Stick Fly, just to name a few. She's also worked extensively with the nonprofit Shotgun Productions. And Patricia, I know you've been a lead producer, managing director, fundraiser for commercial and nonprofit productions, and you've also done extensive work in development. So very interested to hear your introduction and take on this as well.
Well, I got into theater late and had a lot of catching up to do. I went to school for sociology and criminology and women's studies. So my route was very strange, but I got there, and that education is a real plus for helping me select projects and figuring out my own point of view and personal mission statement. Yeah, you're right. And I've worked for 20 years in the nonprofit world with Shotgun Global Arts Initiative, and then also in the commercial world with Sharon Carr, who's on the call, producing lots of Broadway shows. I think all the things you mentioned, Emileena, when you were dissecting producing, are all what a producer does. You know, you do fundraising, you do management, you do, you know, you figure out, depending again where you are in the nonprofit versus the for-profit world, it's very different. My company was small, so I handled the legal, the accounting, this, that, everything. But on the commercial side, you know, I believe as a co-producer on a Broadway show, you know, your job is to raise money. That's why you're being brought on. That's your first job, unless you're the lead producer, and then it's a very different ballgame. Like Tom with Toxic Avenger becomes something else. But even as a fundraising producer, you develop relationships with people, and out of those relationships you can have your creative input because they trust you and they want your input, but it's all about relationship building, in my opinion. That's where it starts.
Well, I love that. The art of the relationship is a whole nother conversation. So thank you. So our next two panelists are both performer producers, and they're also both activists for change. So I'm so flattered and honored that they're able to join us because my focus is really about finding #AnotherWay for the arts industries to adapt and evolve into a better tomorrow. So both of your work has been incredible. I'm going to start with Tonya Pinkins, who has joined us before on TRU panels. She's a Tony Award-winning actress. Her Broadway credits include Merrily We Roll Along, Jelly's Last Jam, The Wild Party, Caroline or Change, and many more. She's also worked on television and film, most recently directing. And she's also an outspoken advocate for change for the BIPOC community. And she's hosting the Reparations Project at Frigid NYC in just a few days on August 18th. So Tonya, welcome.
Unmute. Hi, I'm so pleased to be here today, and it was wonderful getting to hear from all of you. I'm actually hosting the Reparations Project tonight. I'm not with those date things. A 4 and 8, you know, with my eyesight, they look the same. I think I'm an actress and a singer, and I think I've always been a producing artist because when I've wanted to make something, the spirit of wanting to make it would die out when trying to raise money. So I've pretty much generally funded most of the things that I've produced. Not always, well, yeah. But now people are starting to produce other things of mine. So I produced a series of plays at the Tank last year called Truth and Reconciliation of Women, part of which will be shown tonight at the Reparations Show. I have a play, my first play, that'll be performed outdoors in North Carolina at North Carolina Black Rep in October. And I'm currently finishing up my first feature film, a socio-political horror film called Red Pill.
Cool, awesome. So thank you for sharing your perspective on this conversation with us. And last, but certainly not least, I'm really excited to introduce Maria Aponte. I hope I'm saying your name right, Maria. Maria is a performing artist. She's also the 2-time recipient of the International Latino Book Awards for her writing, and she's the founder of Latina 50 Plus. And one of the things that really sold me on Maria for this panel was she said in an email that she learned years ago that in order to survive in the arts, you have to learn to wear many hats, and that is the truth. So welcome, Maria.
Thank you so much. It's Maria Aponte. That's okay. That's okay. No, it's all right. First of all, I just want to say it's been amazing to sit in and hear all of you talk about your work and the areas that you're working in. I am not currently involved in theater in that area per se. I'm in higher education. But I want to say a big shout out to Patricia, who connected me with you. She actually helped me write and produce my one-woman show in Tides of Intolerance. And so a lot of my work is, I'm a native New Yorker. I was born and raised in El Barrio. I'm Puerto Rican. I'm Afro-Puerto Rican. I'm a Bronx artist. And my work that I do, that I produce, is creating a space to break down stereotypes about Latina women. I found when I started in theater in the mid to late 70s, I didn't have the opportunity to study anywhere. So my work was real grassroots. I started out at Henry Street Settlement. I moved to Miriam Colon's theater company, the Actors Playhouse, and that's where I got the bug for producing. I went there to do monologue studies. It was back in that day, you could take a class for $10. Broadway had all sorts of dance halls. I'm really aging myself, but I don't care because I'm comfortable with it. But you could just like slap down $10, and there was like some really great professor that that just knew their stuff, and they taught you how to dance, how to talk, how to sing, and you had that schedule. So Actors Playhouse, I met a playwright. His name is Richard Viteri. He lives in LA, and he had a play called Rockaway Boulevard, and he did this one scene that had this magical thing to it. And, you know, I didn't know any better. I just walked up to him and I said, "Can I look at that script?" And he says, "Hey, you know, it's not that good. Long story short, I took it and I read it, and the storyline was about a salesman that's trying to finagle a couple to sell their house and to property that they're not going to have. Long story short, I read it, and what hit me was, why can't this be the same story for a Latino family? And so he gave me permission. I took the play, I got an all Latino cast, and then I couldn't raise the money. I got it into a playwright series with the Hispanic Organization of Latino Actors. It's called Hola. And at that time they had a festival series at the Pearl Theater. And so they picked it up for me and they took it in their budget, and I got my little credit called production assistant, even though I was the one that bought the play, brought it in. And then moving forward, it's just doing the work. I'm grassroots community artist. I'm an advocate for Bronx arts, and like Tonya, I do the same thing. I invest my own money, and I'm a big advocate for paying my musicians, my performers, and I take the hit. I don't pay myself, and that's why I try to keep the full-time job. So that's that. And then Latina 50 Plus, I launched that in 2014, honoring Latina women over 50 in various career fields, including literature and art. I'm going into my 8th year, so I've given about close to 40 awards, and I get sponsorship from AARP and Bronx Care. And even that, I invite performers to perform, and I pay them out of my budget. So I feel like Pat, everything right now for me is my notebook and the calculator. So that's it.
That's producing another way, I'd say. So what's interesting is what I'm hearing too, you know, we've got these two kind of performer producers and then kind of producers by trade. And the biggest difference that already stands out to me is the fundraising, actually. And I think traditionally, that's what a lot of people have thought of producers as just the money raising people. But as we heard from both Tom and Patricia's introductions, is that there's a lot more than just the fundraising part that goes into it. But that is certainly an issue. So there's already kind of two issues evolving here. But my next question to the panel is just to go straight to it, is, do you consider producing an art? And what is the difference between art and producing if you don't think that is? And again, I don't think there's any one answer to this. And so that's part of the reason why it was important to me to have a panel of multiple perspectives. So I'm very curious to hear all of your perspectives. So who wants to jump in first?
I would say that producing is problem solving, lead producing, or being at that, you know, being a creative producer, because you have to be sort of one step ahead of what's coming and be, you know, like with your calculator going, how am I going to pay this? And this has to go here and this has to go here. Now, there's that financial aspect to it as well. But someone said much earlier in the conversation, the us versus them mentality, you know, the us being the company and the them being the producers. I've encountered that a lot in my career, and it's very disheartening as a producer when that attitude comes up, because, you know, the producer is the one that's out there either raising the money or trying to bring this all together. And sometimes you get a company of people where it becomes them against us, or us against them. And I've always been bothered by that, because I think we're all trying to achieve the same thing. We all have the same goal. And I'd be curious to hear what other panelists have to say about that us versus them mentality and how to avoid that as a producer. I know it's a little off topic, but.
I'd like to talk to Tom's point, because I think it's really interesting. So as you people who have been around TRU for a long time may know me, that I run this company, Shotgun Productions, and, you know, it's a show, it was basically and is a showcase company. In other words, I always felt that as a producer, my goals were so in line with the actors, the writers, the directors, everybody on the project, because the goal was to get noticed. You know, the goal was to see what we can do with this work, you know, get an audience there, and, you know, maybe get a review or whatever, because as you know, in showcases, you can only do 12 performances. So the major papers aren't really interested. And And I would go to equity and say, why are you putting us on the other side? Because our goals are really the same as your actors. Why don't you let us videotape this? Because we could help your actors. If we could have a tape of this, we could send it to other producers or other theater companies and maybe get your actors work because they'll pick up the work. I always saw myself in the same boat as the actors at that level. You know, on Broadway, I think Tom's right. I think it's sad when things come, when it gets to that point. And I really don't remember a time when I've had that experience, even as a co-producer. But I think it's really important, and this is something Maria and I go back to when Shotgun produced her piece Lágrimas de las Madres. Is that right? Say it right? My lousy Spanish accent. You know, I was working with the director who was a dear friend of mine, and he taught me this really important lesson, because at that time, my first answer was always no. And he said, Patricia, if you want to be a good producer, you have to learn how to engage and find creative solutions. And ever since then, I changed my ways completely. And I think the most important creative thing a producer can do is help guide the project through coming up with creative solutions to the various challenges, as Tom mentioned, come up every day. A new challenge is coming up. And our job is to figure out a way how to make it work, you know, along with the creative team. And I think the most important thing a producer can do is listen. Don't talk, listen to what they want, what your creatives want, and then try to figure out how we can work together to accomplish what they're looking to create. And so that is what I consider a creative producer. You know, if they want my input on text, you know, or a song or a lyric or something, that's fine. You know, I'm there. I definitely have opinions, as many of you know, but I'm not going to give it unless that relationship bears that out in a positive way. So.
Yeah.
I have had the privilege of working with some of the top, quote, creative producers of the last century, and that would be Harold Prince, George Wolfe, Sheldon Epps, and Lloyd Richards. And they were artists in their own right, and they were producers. And sometimes they only wore their producer hats, and sometimes they wore their director hats. So in working with them, I think the ideal producer is trying to figure out how to get the artist's vision achieved. And sometimes that means that producer has to say no to things, and sometimes that producer is trying to stretch a dollar or figure out where I can move money from here to there. But I think all producers, creative or any kind of producer, is trying to figure out how we can get the vision that got everybody excited. How do we make it happen? Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes, you know, if you're just the actor, you don't know all of the chess pieces that are being moved around to make something happen. But I think ideally the producer is really just trying to get the artistic vision achieved and the budget that everyone set, because if it doesn't happen, then your show closes. I was in a show called Holler If You Hear Me, and they were new producers, and they were relying on an artist to advise them about producing, and that ended up being a show that just, they lost every penny they made. They really needed that financial, business-minded person to run that show. They had a lot of heart, they'd raised money, they had artists, but this person guiding the ship and making decisions, it wasn't there. So they lost $8 million. So they're different jobs, but I have worked with people who embody both hats in one.
Interesting. And I think that's also those examples, and I'll let you speak next, Maria. Those examples, though, I think is what really bred the us versus them mentality that Tom was referencing, and I certainly also have had experience with. So I think that's interesting. Maria, what's your take?
So I guess I come from the poor person's no frills community arts. The benefit of being an artist, being an actor, singing, dancing, and then going into producing is that you understand the actor. They can tell you in 2 seconds what they need, what they don't need, and you understand them because you know how to you've worn that shoe already. And in community art, our world is literally for that community that you're going to be taking that production to. You might be taking it to a school in the South Bronx to teenagers that have never gone to the theater. Or you're taking it to a park where dudes are on the corner, you know, smoking their weed and like, yo, man, that looks good. Can I be in it? And you're like, no.
Yeah.
The reason why I had moved away from commercial theater is because I never felt I got the opportunity to work in it and and I didn't see my voice and I didn't see my face, particularly for Puerto Rican women, that we were always stereotyped just to play certain roles. You know, either you were the maid or you were the prostitute or you were strung out on dope. This was my experience from the 70s and the 80s. And so when I got an opportunity to start telling my story, I was able to take my piece from Tides, 33 minutes, turn it into a two-act play, and Patricia brought in the dancers and everything. And then when the show was over, I had this project that I wanted to continue, and that's when I learned how to use the college circuit. I redid the entire script, brought it down to 55 minutes. I worked with Stuart Schulman, and I took the next 10 years and I took it to college. And it was the most enlightening thing because your job when you get into this business is to really help the next generation. And so when it came to production, I had to learn how to put it out of pocket. But getting back to what Patricia was saying about building relationships and production, if you have a good product and your audience believes in it, you can pass the hat and people will give you money. And if they see that you're consistent, they will continue to invest in you. And then when you look again, you have your own, you have your own listserv of contacts. You know who you can go to ask for money. You know when to ask for money, because you have to know, you got to take up the calendar and look at when do people donate? Is it in January or is it December or is it April? So in doing community theater, the production and producing is not at that level as of Broadway. You know, if I ever get there, I'll probably have a heart attack and you can just wheel me out. Because I say, really, I did it? No, I'm only kidding. I really am happy with what I do because it's about teaching and growth. But I think it's consistent in what I think we're all saying. The thing is we have to learn to meet in the middle and want to help each other and stop being in compartments, because now Broadway's closed.
Right.
What's it going to look like when it comes back?
Well, that's why I find right now such an interesting time, because this divide between us and them, I think we have more and more people just producing themselves who are not waiting for other producers. And so I also think it's a time where maybe traditional producers, if they might even get left behind. I think the creative producers are kind of are on board with that. But what do you guys think about that?
Well, I know there's a lot of development going on. Like everybody's developing things so that whenever this moment is done or whenever the vaccine is done, there will be a lot of things going into rehearsal. You know, everybody's very busy with developing, you know. I also wanted to speak to the us and them thing, having been the actor as a us and them person, in that I'll just give one example. I remember once at the Public Theater, working in the park, they wanted us to do some shows for some, I don't know, they wanted us to just add some shows for whatever reason they wanted. And I remember that the actors said no. And it became very us and them for us, because it's an 1,800 seat theater. It's one of the largest theaters in the city. And we were allotted 2 free tickets for the entire run. And yet the theater holds 500 seats per night for donors in case they show up. And so for us as artists, we just felt like we can't even get our people in and you're holding seats for money. I thought this was the Public Theater. You know, that definitely made us feel like an us and them, because it was like, this is no longer for us, we're the public. This is for some rich donors' whim, you know? So I know that that's the kind of thing that will make actors feel us and them about it. When we feel that other people are being treated more importantly than us who are on the stage, or that benefits are being conferred on people and we're not being, you know, offered what we think is our due.
Yeah, well put.
I just want to give a shout out to Tonya and your article that you wrote in the Metro, I think it was. It was, like I said, it's my turn to shut up and listen. And that was a really eye-opening article. And that kind of speaks to also what you're talking about with your experience also at CSC. So thank you for that article.
Thank you.
We'll have to put that link in the chat for sure. I'd love to hear, Tom, your response to that as a commercial producer, being kind of from the other side.
You mean to the point about the seats and the, well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example of it not being explained appropriately and just sort of being thrust on everybody. Hey, we're just going to do this. We're adding these 3 performances. You have to say yes. And you're like, well, that's really the wrong way to approach it. You know, if it was important for certain reasons, those reasons need to be transparently passed on so everybody understands exactly what's going on. And easy compromise would be to say, well, and we'll give you an additional 4 seats each, or we'll give you some, so that there's something in it for everybody involved and everybody feels like I'm giving and I'm getting at the same time. That would be a way to approach that. It gets so, I think that the larger the production and the more money that gets spent on the production, it seems to be like the less transparency there is in terms of how things happen. Because, and now, you know, now a Broadway musical, I just read the article about Diana, and I was shocked to see that it was capitalized at $17.5 million. And I was like, wow. And that doesn't even include the $1 million they're spending to record it for Netflix, I understand. So, you know, these incredible amounts of money are now coming together, and you have, you know, whole groups of co-producers in order to be able to spread the risk around enough to be able to take that. And so I guess when the stakes start to get that high, it's easy to forget that taking that extra minute to explain something in detail, the value that that can have for everybody who it trickles down to in the production. So that's how I would respond to that.
Yeah, and Ellen Cohn put in the chat too, she said she sees this conversation really about money in some ways. The difference between an artist and a producer is oftentimes it boils down to money, and the money raising leads to, I think, this breakdown of communication, because kind of what you're saying a little bit is that, you know, you become so, as a producer becomes really dependent on that money and has to make these choices on that money, and that's a side that I think a lot of artists don't see from the producers. There is this like kind of shadow of where the money's coming from, how the money is coming in, and kind of the promises that are made to get the money and things like that. So I think that's also a big part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Broadway, be really interesting to see what Broadway looks like when everything comes back to, the new normal, whatever the new normal is going to be. There was also a really interesting article in New York Times today about the production of film It's Jurassic Park, the new one is being made in London. They're filming it. It's of course expensive. It's a $200 million big studio production. But in order to deal with the COVID situation, they have to minimize the crew to as small as possible because of the testing protocols. And so the actors are being required to learn about microphone placement and how to deal this and how to prep this for themselves. And when typically in a normal world, you would be like, the actor shows up, he gets mic'd, he gets makeup, he walks on set. But I thought it was fascinating to see that the compromises being made to deal with the fact that we live in this COVID world, and how reducing the size of the company that's working on this film makes sense because there's less risk and there's less potential exposure to the virus. So it'll be really interesting to see how the world is different. And also, you know, having worked on streaming musicals now for several years, you know, capturing theater and capturing soundstage theater and live theater has always been sort of poo-pooed on by the unions because they're so afraid that it's going to be exploiting the actors in a certain way, or they're not going to get their due. But suddenly when you could no longer do live theater, virtual theater became all the rage and sort of opened up this opportunity for things to be captured, and those captures and that developmental work to be able to represent the next, where we're going to be with theater when it all comes back. Tonya said earlier, all this work that's being developed virtually now is going to want to take that next step when we get back to the new normal. And it'll be curious to see what lasting effect happens because of all of the collaboration that's happening now in ways that pre-COVID was always thought like, well, we'll never do that. We can't do that. You know, that's crossing the lines or whatever the case may be. So I'm curious to see where we'll be, you know, knock on wood, when we have a vaccine and things begin to turn to the new normal.
I wanted to speak to something Patricia said about, you know, the union not sort of supporting showcases, et cetera. I've been a former elected, and I think what people forget about Actors Equity is it is a labor union. It has federal obligations. And as a federal labor union, it must ensure that its employees are paid a federal wage. That is its legal responsibility. So there are things that it just cannot do as a federal labor union. Also, you know, if you think about it, when Equity began 103 years ago, it was the only union in town. And so when film and stuff happened, essentially the theater people said, we don't want that. And so another union had to develop to deal with that. And it was my experience that there was an averse energy inside of the union to filming. And I remember when I was doing Jelly's Last Jam, there was, we were supposed to be the very first Broadway show to be filmed live and broadcast. And I'm not going to say who, but a sort of campaign went around to basically tell the actors, and I think that the union sort of supported this idea that if people can see it on the screen, they won't come to the theater. And it was only 5 years ago when I was on the board, it was the first time in history that Equity actually, as council, voted that they wanted to support the filming of theater, but in actual application, that is not what's happening. So they've stated it, but for instance, because I was a union member, when I did my Truth and Reconciliation plays at the Tank last year, I did a contract with all of my actors prior to ever starting rehearsal that the conditioned upon accepting this job, we could film it. And I did that with all my designers. Everybody had a contract with me allowing me to film. Once we got into production, Equity came in and said, you can't film. And they actually wanted us to pay $785 per actor in order to film it. Well, I didn't deal with them at all because one, I knew I didn't have to. I knew they had no legal authority over me, that I had a contract that these actors had signed to and they have a right to do that. And two, $785 for a non-broadcastable recording is more than an actor gets paid under a SAG-AFTRA theatrical contract. So though they may be stating that this is what they want, they were actually effectively working against my ability to record this. So I ended up making a contract with SAG-AFTRA, which allows you to record and to fund at a later time when you actually get a broadcast deal.
That makes sense. That's great, Tonya. Great story.
That's another way. Hashtag another way. Yeah. Just finding ways to make it work. Yeah, Maria.
Go ahead.
I think I want to address the self-producing self-artists. What you're seeing a lot of, especially in the Latino theater, is people are just taking it on their own to produce their own work. They're writing their own plays. They're using the technology to get their message across. Everyone is gravitating to the Latino theater. They're working with pregones in the Bronx, Repertorio Español in Manhattan, and they just they just transferred over to Zoom like nothing. They were like, oh really? Because we're dealing now with generations that are tech savvy. And they know how to manipulate and know how to find the systems that they need to make to do what they have to do. Granted, most performers want to do live, but they also understand that this may be the way that we're going, that we may wind up being a virtual theater community. Because look at the money that you're not spending to produce something on a Zoom platform. You can charge maybe a fee for people to log in, but you're not paying for space, you're not paying for electricity, you're not paying for the concession stand, the ushers, and the list goes on and on. The only thing is that it'll put a lot of professional people out of business, that this is their livelihood. That's the sad part. But in the community arts world, it's almost like, you know, you're doing something with no budget. And interestingly enough, a lot of projects that I do, it attracts you guys. I've seen all of you come in and sneak into the Bronx Museum. And they're like, hey, that was really nice. You know, like, can I take some notes? And we're like, sure, knock yourself out. because there's a different kind of energy there that people want to gravitate to, because there's no walls. You can walk up to whoever you want to talk to right in the same room during the reception. In the commercial world, it's like the status quo. Who can you call here? When can I meet so-and-so? Is it okay to contact you? Let me put you on my calendar. So it's a different kind of way of getting the art out. But I'm telling you, a lot of my friends, man, they're just producing they're just out there doing their work. People are doing their Black Lives Matters pieces. There's a whole series. There's going to be a lot of COVID-19 plays coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bronx was the epicenter of COVID in March.
It really was.
And I'm involved in an oral history project through Fordham University that just got a write-up in the Times a couple of days ago from the professor. And I'm thinking about, how's this affecting, I think I want to write about being an elder Afro-Latina, and I'm in that community that this could take me out. What does that feel like, walking that line of death? So that's another thing that's going to hit broad. I don't know if we should have musicals based on COVID, but I won't be surprised if they come out, because that's just the way it is. But staying in the moment of the history that we're living in is going to be the hottest topic for writers, dancers, creators. Staying in the moment and allowing the people of color write their own stories and do their own stories, keeping the authenticity, because that's what I fight for. My authenticity as a Puerto Rican writer, as a Puerto Rican woman. I grew up on welfare. That doesn't mean that I'm a statistic or I'm a stereotype. But So you get the people to want to listen to your story and invest in it. That's the tricky part. And so you have to know how to market yourself.
Yeah, and that's also producing, I think. I love hearing you speak, because I think you're talking about producing, which on some level is the exact same thing that Tom is doing, you know, Tom and Patricia, but you're doing it on such a grassroots level. And it's kind of nice to see this like filtered down version of like no frills, but it's just producing at the end of the day, I think. I love it. And you're being very innovative about your way of doing it.
I'm going to have to excuse myself. I'm so happy that I got to be here and hear all of you. I'm going to go and get ready to host the reparations project tonight. I think my vision for the future of theater is that there'll be more co-productions of theater and it being broadcast, because I've heard that some of these Zoom plays have had 5,000 to 20,000 people in a night, which would take a year to happen in the future. And as Disney saw, you know, releasing an animated movie online, they made $200 million in the first week. So I think there'll be more openness to this combination of live and online. So blessings to everybody and stay safe. And thank you so much for having me.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank you, Tonya.
Good luck.
Thank you, Tonya. I want to bring in Bob, because Bob brought up an interesting point. Bob, do you want to jump in and
Oh, sure. I think we politely stepped over a topic that I think is worth talking about a little bit more. Patricia, you basically said in passing that if the writer cares about your feelings about a scene or a song, sure, you're willing to give your opinion. But I think that part of the idea of creative producing is that, well, first of all, a producer gets a project. A producer has to sit down with the writer and determine whether the project that the producer sees is the same thing that the writer thinks they wrote. So once you come to a common vision, and once a producer and a writer can agree that this is what this play is, and this is what this play needs to be, even though that may change a little bit on each side, generally there's an agreement. I think that it's very healthy for a producer to be able to let a writer know that something's not working, that lyric may not be saying what they think it's saying. A lot of this does become the director's job, and a lot of times the producer needs to communicate through the director. But in early stages, before there is a director, or even when there is a director, doesn't a producer have conversations that are creatively driven?
Let me talk to that, Bob, because I think it depends, you know, what hat I'm wearing and how I'm answering this question. You know me for a very, very long time, over about 20 years, you know, with Shotgun, as a small nonprofit, as the managing director of the company, you know, I worked in all areas and definitely worked as a quote creative producer, giving my 2 cents. I remember Maria showing up at my apartment with scraps of paper, and I said, "Read them to me." And she's like, "Read, right? Isn't that what you said the other day?" I said, "Read your scraps." And together we sat there and came up with a project, because her story was so fascinating to me, about 3 generations of women in El Barrio. So, you know, yes, it's you could have a creative, you can have input in so many different ways, you know. So if you're coming on like where I came on with Maria, I really feel that together with Stuart, we helped guide that project, you know, to a point, and then we decided, oh, let's add dancers, let's add live percussion. What do you think, Maria? And she was like, well, let's try it. And we all got together and tried it. And it was a group effort, I felt, you know, with everything, of course, as it was Maria's project, she had to agree to it. But then she went on after we finished developing it, and she took it in, like she said, in all different directions at university. On Broadway, it's a very different situation, unless you're the lead producer. So like on Marie right now, that Sharon Carr and I are working on, the new Ahrens and Flattery and Sue Stroman musical, because we got in so early, you know, and have a relationship with Strove from Scottsboro, you know, and just really hit it off with Lynn and Steven, you know, yeah, we could talk to them about creative things. Absolutely, we talk a lot of creativity. We're even talking about, we're on the phone tomorrow talking about what to do if Broadway doesn't open, like how we could take this project and do something else with it. So there's a lot of creative producing going on with Marie. You know, there were some projects I got on, like even the band's visit. We got on so late. Sharon and I got on so late. There was really nothing very creative to have input in, except for marketing. And marketing, we did our best to help Oren and the lead producers come up with some ideas. But so it really, you know, Broadway is much more, you know, it's very different. It's not the community theater. It's not the Shotgun Theater. It's not even a large vineyard, you know, nonprofit theater or an Atlantic theater. It's different. And you got to know your place. And through time, as you develop relationships with various lead producers and various creatives, and they see that you're passionate and serious and that you have some really great thoughts, yes, you can be a creative producer and a fundraiser and a problem-solving producer and a managing producer. You could be all those things, but it's different.
So I'm curious, Maria, how did you feel getting all that creative input from your producer? How was the experience for you?
Well, I was very insulted. Listen, I'm second generation of the New York Poets Cafe. So that was I came out of No Frills, Lower East Side, poets, mostly men. And I took acting classes. I took all these classes, but I didn't learn the real business of theater until I started working with Patricia. You have to get humble when you want to do your work. And I had to get humble and understand that I got an opportunity to take, yes, I did have scraps of paper. My first poem was written on a brown paper bag, and now it's in an award-winning Latino self-published book. But when I met, and you are in the Huffington Post article, so I had to learn. It was a learning process. And how do you take those pieces of paper and thread a story? Because I didn't know I was writing my story. I was just writing whatever I saw. I wrote about La Maqueta. I wrote about the riots in Harlem after they killed Martin Luther King, and my mother and I having to take the bus across 125th Street, and the sanitation department sweeping the glass in front of the bus, because that's how much glass was in the street. I didn't know I was telling these stories. And so it was a process. Took the little pieces of paper, start writing these characters. Oh my God. And so I learned so much that this is what I took with me 20 years later. And this is how I work when I'm doing anything in the community. And they're like, wow, you really know this stuff. And I said, yeah, I had good teachers.
Yeah.
But it works both ways.
And you got to be grateful and be thankful when people want to step out of the way to help you. Not, you know, sometimes I see folks and their ego gets in the way, and I said, you're not getting that. You know, you really have to have empathy and because you're giving your art to someone, and that's special. So that's pretty much.
Yeah.
I just want to say on the other side, you know, working with Maria, she taught me how to be a creative producer because I learned where maybe I was crossing the line. We were both much younger back then. It was 1996. So it was many years ago. It was my first real project that I was curating as a creative producer. And, you know, but I think we walked away from that experience, you know, me a better creative producer and Maria learning how to be a self-producing artist, you know. So again, it's about relationship building.
Yeah, I'd love to hear. Tom, did you want to weigh in on this?
Well, it was interesting that the words "the business of theater" were used because, you know, theater exists at all different levels, from your small community theaters to your developing the high schools and colleges and regional theaters and all that. The business of theater is really when you start thinking of Broadway and large commercial, because that's really where it becomes a manageable business where there's got to be a profit and loss statement and it's got to make sense out of it. And I don't think Broadway so much as a developmental world. I think of Broadway as a destination where you develop things in places all over the country and the world through whatever means are necessary. And if a group of people get together and say, hey, we think it would work in the 10 blocks on Broadway, then you go out and you raise your $17.5 million for a musical, and you bring it in for a destination. But I don't necessarily think of Broadway as a developmental area, but the developmental areas where you really work with the producer or your own producer, and you develop and you find what makes it work. And then if you could work that way up the chain, take it as far as a piece will go. And not every piece belongs on Broadway. There are shows that reach their audience without having to take that very dangerous, expensive step. And so it's all about the business of theater being, where is the right, appropriate place for your show to live?
When you talk about nonprofits, for example, if you look at the Atlantic or the Roundabout or any of our really well-established nonprofit theaters, they all have artistic directors. And those artistic directors are the ones that's really helping guide the project. They have a managing director, they have an artistic director. One's handling the business, one's handling, the artistry that supports the mission statement of the nonprofit.
Right.
So, there's a really great example of creative producers, is your artistic directors at nonprofits. And that, like Tom spoke to, is really where the development is happening, and Broadway is a destination. It really turns out that, there isn't, I don't want to say there's not a lot of creativity, because the creativity for Broadway comes in problem solving, and then things that worked in a smaller house may not be working on a larger stage. So now you can have your input, and producers can have input, in very many ways creatively. But it's by the time it gets to Broadway, a lot is already accomplished in terms of I think of at least the bones, a good chunk of the bones and the fat of the show.
Yeah, and certainly the higher up you get, the more commercial the show is, the more people in the more positions like artistic director and more kind of creative positions up there too. If anyone has a question, I'd love to get some questions. Please raise your hand in the participants box. I know a lot of questions have been coming in through the chat. I haven't been able to keep up with all of them. Bob, did you have one more question before we take?
Well, actually, I did. For Tom. Tom, you have always been my model for what I think of as a creative producer, because you had the idea for Toxic Avenger, you got the rights to it, you had the property, you had to bring in the people that wrote it. So right. There had to be some communication between you and the writers.
Oh, clearly, yeah. There were several meetings with Joe first about what the concept of it was and what we envisioned as it being, and where did we think it would ultimately live, was a lot of conversations that we had about it. And then Joe introduced us to David and brought David to the table. And that was we were very involved in the process of developing that through several readings, and then the ultimate George Street production, all of which was incredibly collaborative to take a piece and ultimately get the vision of it that we felt, because the Toxic Avenger property, if you look at the underlying films, they're rather non-commercial in sense of that they don't speak to a broad audience that you would put into a New York house. So we always kept one eye on the language and one eye on the commercial viability of it, so that it didn't become a trauma-esque property, which is much more raunchy and below the belt. And that was always the struggle all along, and especially when you're in New York in a commercial house. We were at New World Stages, we had someone that was always answering emails. Can I bring my 7-year-old to this show? Can I bring my 12-year-old to this show? And that's, an audience that unfortunately you are required to have if you're sitting in a large 499-seat off-Broadway theater. You have got to make sure that you can sell those seats, and you can't alienate any of your audience, really. And that gets expanded further when you get into the Broadway environment, now that, over 50% is the tourist market. So it's, as we head post-pandemic, it'll be curious to see the kind of work that we're seeing on Broadway immediately after this pandemic, because it's going to be they're going to want to have shows that they know are going to appeal as a broad a base as possible, because tourism is going to be down for a while. It's going to take a while to get Manhattan back to a place where the streets are as busy as they were in December of this last year. Anyway, I hope that answered your question.
That does. I've just been waiting for it. It's like the dirty words that no one wants to speak. A producer does sometimes tell a writer what their vision is.
Well, if the producer is generating the project, like Tom generated, it's his idea, Toxic Avenger. I don't know if you remember, Bob, when Shotgun was working on a play about women on the front lines in Iraq, a band of sisters, like we had this idea and we were looking for a writer to develop it. So clearly our role is a creative producer there, because the vision is in our heads. The vision was in Tom's head, and luckily he found the right writer to bring that to fruition. I did not. Although we did have a great time with one writer and we did a reading and it just wasn't what we wanted, and we abandoned the project, which sometimes happens also, it just doesn't work out. So producers can be creative producers by generating their own ideas for a project, or if they option a book, and then they have to put the team together. Clearly the vision comes from the producer, and you have to transfer that or find the writer and the musical people, if it's a musical, who kind of adapt to your vision, and then together you work it out together, and it merges and something comes of it, and that's joyous when that happens, right, Tom? I mean, that must have been the best project.
It is, because they don't always happen. I mean, to give you another quick example, there was a play that I was very interested in optioning that I found somebody had written, and I thought it was really quite good, but it did need some structural work, some changes that needed to happen, I think, in my opinion, to make it a stronger piece. And the author's perspective was, well, I think the piece is perfect. And I said, well, would you be willing to make some changes? He said, yes, once you sign the option agreement. And I was like, well, that's the kiss of death, because the option agreement generally says that the author has the final say on every word in the script. And if the author's perspective is, I won't change it till you sign the option agreement, that's like pretty much a red flag for me. And I was like, no, it's not the path I want to go down. So there's a lot of people who say they're collaborative, but not necessarily are when it comes right down to the nitty-gritty. And to have in the producer-author relationship where the author has already created something, you've got to really cultivate that relationship so that there's trust between both parties.
Absolutely. I'm going to go to some questions next, but I did just want to say that I was speaking with Brendan Bradley, who unfortunately had to leave the other day, but he's created this virtual theater, and he's an artist who created this virtual theater space. He's an actor who created this virtual theater space for producers to be able to produce him. And one of the things he was saying is that it is about communication and relationships. And he says, now with more and more artists, performers who were moving towards getting tipped as a financial model and or subscriptions, there's less room for a producer unless that producer and the artist are communicating about the value exchange, and I think Tom's example is kind of an example of where there was a breakdown of each other understanding the value that you were bringing, and I think it was smart for you to not push that with the option. But I think moving forward, we do need this more transparency even between both sides, and so they understand the value, because I think there is, like I said in the beginning, there's this like gray area a lot of where artists don't understand what's going on the producer side. So cool, thank you. I'm going to go to a question. Elizabeth Layton, would you like to turn on your video?
Hi.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks everybody. I'm wondering if you're a first-time musical writer and you have a first-time composer, what would convince producers that even though you're right out of the box, you're worth looking at?
If I responded to the material, if I looked at it and it spoke to me and I felt like it would speak to other people, I don't think there's a first time for everyone. So it just depends on what you've written and how it speaks to people.
I think it would be really helpful if you're looking to submit is to go on IBDB and the Internet Broadway database and see what producers, what they're producing. You know, I'm a firm believer that every producer has a personal mission statement or a point of view when they pick projects to produce. And you know, I'll be really honest, no one's going to invite me to a reading of Tootsie or Pretty Woman, because they just know it'd be a wasted seat in the room because I would not do it, you know, because if you look at my resume, you're going to look at a person who does more serious type, even musicals, you know, ones that speak to the human condition, you know, because that's my background in sociology. So if I was an artist, I would try to find a producer that would like my material. You know what I'm saying? And then with the internet, it's so easy to kind of just do some research about what kind of works people are, you know, patterns in people's works. You know what I'm saying? And that would be a really big help. And then you're not just throwing it against the wall and see what sticks, but you're kind of narrowing your focus. Does that help?
Thank you so much.
That's also about relationships, to Patricia's point earlier. So I think that's important too. You can try to build that relationship, maybe even before you pitch your show. That's what I always tell people to do. Yeah. Neil Rubenstein.
In regards to what this conversation just was, I would like to think that most lead producers, because that's what we're talking about at this point here, the people who are coming with a new project or optioning something, they have a modicum of creativity, but they also have a responsibility fiscally. They're the ones who are looking at, will this make money? I can't just do this because, oh, I think it's a wonderful show, I love it, and I'm doing it for my own entertainment. No, you've got to go in there thinking, will there be an audience for it? And in that way, you have to go and look at the script and say, will this relate? Will the audience relate to it? And you have that conversation with the author, with the playwright. And if the playwright doesn't want to do that, you have nothing. It has to be very clear from the beginning that it's the vision of the producer and also the director of where it's going to go. The director more so, at least in my case, I see the producers kind of sitting in the background and stepping in if he sees a problem or she sees a problem that would be coming up.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of, you know, of what we kind of need, a lot of producers saying what we need from the writers. I'm curious, Maria, do you have a response to this from a writer's point of view?
That's a tough one. Because when you write, it's very personal to you, and it's like your baby, and you have it in a bubble. And then if you did a reading of it, you had a reading with your friends or family members or people that like your work. And then comes the litmus test when you take it to someone that doesn't know you and doesn't know your work. And again, I say this because, and from my own experience in working with so many different people, when you have a project, you have to think about, where am I going with this? Who do I want to meet? Do I have something of value that someone that doesn't know me is going to like what I wrote? And you have to be ready to be rejected. You have to, you have to be able to understand, like if Tom said to me, Maria, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like looking at him, I said, no, we're not doing an option because I have to trust you. When you're going to work with producers, directors, you all have to become like a family and really trust who you're working with and who are you bringing in. Do I want to show my script to some person that is into chopping heads and hanging them off of the Brooklyn Bridge? No. Although I do like to show The Alienist, but that's another story. No, it was really, 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 really good, well-written stuff. But that's the chance you have to take. I'm getting ready to work on a one-act play that I wrote for my master's thesis 4 years ago on a Cuban black slave and a Brazilian black slave. And I have no idea where it's going to go, but I'm getting ready to retire, so now I'm going to have time to write again. When I'm done with it, I have, that thing in the body, that nervousness, like, okay, so now I'm going to make this real. Do I want to send this to Patricia? And is she going to call me up and say, what the hell is this? Or no, I don't want to read it. So that's the only thing I could say as a writer. If you're going to go in this business, you're going to be putting yourself out there, and you have to understand that. If not, then don't do it. Then just buy the ticket and sit down and enjoy the show. Because if I don't do it, someone else behind me is going to want to. And that to me is just pretty much the common sense end of what I've learned. And, you know, so I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's about relationships, I think, too, again, which is what we've been saying throughout this. So before we leave, though, I want to give all my panelists a chance to say their final words. Who'd like to go first?
Well, I just want to thank you for having this. I think it was an interesting conversation. I think, you know, we started with us and them, and I think we've come around full circle to realizing that really it doesn't have to be that way and shouldn't be that way. And that, you know, to make something really work, to get a project from the page to the stage requires cooperation and open communication. And, you know, we have to be able to say what we're seeing or say what we feel, and we have to put our big girls and boys pants on. And if we don't agree, be able to find a creative way to have the conversation to move the project forward. That is the most important thing, because the project is the thing. We're all here to bring the baby to birth, right? That's the whole point of this, and that's why we're all together. So we have to, we're playing shifting roles all the time, and we have to understand that and become one as a family, as I think someone said before. So that's my final words.
Yeah, I would agree exactly what she just said. It's theater is one, if not the most collaborative of art forms, because all the pieces have to come together and everybody's got to be moving in the same direction. And it takes a strong producer, but also a cheerleader to make sure that everybody feels like they're excited about where they're going at the same time, and keeping the transparency and the channels of the communication open so that the train is all going and leaves the station at the same time and is all going toward the same destination. And that's what producing ultimately is making sure that everybody is on the same page and everybody feels excited about where they're going.
Absolutely. And I might even throw in there that that's an art. I think that's an art to keeping everybody on the same page and managing relationships and staying focused. So that's been my experience. Maria.
So I guess my spiritual side is coming out. So I will say this like we do in the Yoruba religion. Esto es una limpieza. Translation, what we are living in now is a cleaning. We're being cleansed. And this, unfortunately, pandemic has put us in a place where everything's been peeled off. And we have to be our authentic selves. And I think there's going to be a new Broadway that's going to be born because of the social injustice, the racial situation, the awareness of the lack of actors and actresses in the business, on the stage, in the front, in the union. And I think, and I agree with Pat and Tom, that this is about building a better community and developing empathy and emotional intelligence. I'm sorry, now I'm putting my counselor hat on because that's what I do at Fordham. But the truth of the matter is, this is a great opportunity to really look at ourselves and go, wait a minute, do we want to stay stuck or do we want to grow? Because man, there's a lot of amazing talent out here that's waiting to be, you know.
I just have to pick up on that because, you know, talking about the pandemic being cleansing that it is, but then also the reawakening of the Black Lives Matter movement. There's two things, these two major events happening. I just can't see how we can't come out on the other side of this renewed and refreshed, and possibly looking at situations with a perspective that we could never have had a year ago.
This is a great opportunity to write work that has to do with healing and change and growth. Because if we don't do it,
Well,
I'm just going to watch Singing in the Rain forever and ever. That's all I got to say.
Well, you're also pointing out, Maria, the importance of the arts and how, you know, it may be time also for all of us, you know, to deal with our government and, you know, really do, you know, the funding is so necessary because the arts is healing, and it can help us get through this, just like it helped us get through 9/11 and the financial crisis and anything else that's gone on, World War II, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we need to appreciate and embrace our own art and make it relevant to more than just our community.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much, Maria. That was beautifully put. So thank you, Maria, Patricia, and Tom for sharing your perspectives with us, giving us your time.
I just wanted to let everybody know that if you want to donate to keep us going, you can go to https://truonline, truonline.org /make-a-donation. Yeah, so please. And thank you, everybody. Thank you to my panel. Thanks, Tom, always. Maria, nice meeting you. I'm so pleased to have you. And Patricia, great seeing you. So here we go. I'm about to create breakout rooms.